Hello and welcome to the Life After Diets podcast. I'm Sarah Dosanjh, psychotherapist and author of the book, I Can't Stop Eating.
And I'm Stefanie Michele, binge recovery health coach. If you feel out of control around food, we get it because we've been there.
Thank you for joining our conversations about how to make peace with food and feel more comfortable in our bodies.
Now on to this week's episode. Every time I edit these podcasts, I'm like, how did we begin this one? And they're always like some variation of, hey, Steph. Hey, Sarah.
I think we should use that as the beginning. So we need to come up with something new then. We had some lovely feedback about your singing on the anxiety and depression.
Yeah, there are a couple
episode.
of YouTube. And yours, might I add.
When
Because
did
you
I
let
sing?
in a little trill in there at some point.
Okay, so does that mean you're going to sing hello? And
Hello, everybody. No, I have a bug in my throat. As I've been coughing prior to this entire episode, but I have my water here. Let's see. I'm not singing, but I do want to tell listeners two things, actually. One, that we have a community that's growing. And so for anyone who's not aware, links are in show notes to become a member of our community where there are bonus Q&A episodes and live episodes. There's discounts on things like live events, which actually our first one is coming up at the end of January. I'm flying to London. Those monthly calls and monthly support meetings to just get to know each other in a Facebook group. And yeah, I just wanted to let people know that exists out there.
Yes.
And now on to this week's episode.
Hey, that sounds like the mid-episode link, doesn't it? Now let's get back to the episode.
Which is?
Well, first of all, is it quasi or quasi or how do we say?
I think I say both.
Semi or semi-recovered?
Either. Honestly, I think it's either here. Or we could just rephrase it as like, what does it mean to be recovered? Or what does it feel like to be semi-recovered, quasi-recovered? Maybe they feel different depending on how you pronounce it.
This request was put forward by Lisa from our community. And she was saying that this is something that she's currently dealing with, where your behaviors are no longer disordered or nowhere near as much, but your thoughts are still completely entrenched in the eating disorder, whether they are thoughts about food, eating, or body image. Even though you're pretty sure you're doing the right things, she asks if it's something we've experienced, how long did it go on for? What's your advice on how to deal with it? Because it seems so unfair, not to mention discouraging. And also, she went on to say about, is there a point where you get to where it's like, this is enough? Food still isn't comfortable. It's still a bit of a struggle, but it's not as bad as it was. Does that mean that's what you can expect? I think people want to know, is full recovery possible for them?
What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm reluctant to say that I know what's possible for everyone, but my stance, I always start from a hopeful place. Because if you don't believe full recovery is possible, then it really isn't going to be. That said, I can also see people beating themselves up because they think that they should feel fully recovered, and maybe they don't. I think it's always possible to heal your relationship with food and your body more. And for me, it is an ongoing thing, but I do feel very much recovered from the binge eating aspect of it. That's not to say that food and body image is always an entirely comfortable experience, but I think I don't catastrophize it anymore.
Yeah.
I would say I'm in a better place now than I was even 2 years ago when I would have still called myself recovered at that point. So
it grows.
Yeah. I don't know if we hit a point when we're finally done, Steph, and then we'll close the podcast down and go home.
I kind of have an IFS, internal family systems, sort of visualization of it, where because we have memory and because we have a part of us that it went through this experience, there is a part of us that will hold it, at some. So I really feel very much recovered, but I don't feel the way that I felt before food was ever an issue, because there's a part of me that went through this, and that part of me will forever be a part of me. And I have memory of it, and I know what it is, and those pathways laid themselves down in my brain and my body somewhere, so they're there now. And that doesn't mean that I actively that I'm in touch with them as much as I used to be. It used to be the part, like the biggest part of me, but now it's a part in there, but there's more parts of me, and there's a recovered part of me that takes center stage, that lives with me most of the day. And so I think about it like, I don't expect myself to feel like it never happened and that I'm sort of like returning to some state where like it's a 0% of something in my brain or body. If I was reaching for that, I don't think I would ever find that because we have life experience and that's part of what life living is. All of our experiences are part of us. But it's not a suffering situation anymore. And I think for me when I think about recovery, I mean technically it's the absence of symptoms. And I don't just consider symptoms to be the behaviors. I also consider symptoms to be the mental strife. That is part of that. I think sometimes in traditional therapy or in recovery programs, there is a focus on eliminating behaviors. And sometimes that I think this is where this question really can come up a lot because there's people who are like, I'm weight restored, I'm no longer restricting because I've been through this program, I'm no longer purging, I'm no longer. But my mind is still consumed with these thoughts. And to me, that's as much of a symptom as the behaviors are. So when I think about being recovered, it's not only the cessation of behaviors surrounding the disorder, but also the thoughts and the emotional attachment to it to the degree where we're no longer suffering from it. And that's a spectrum. So, like you were just mentioning, I'm recovered, but even that has been on a spectrum and will continue to be. I expect in 10 years, I hope,
Mhm.
that it will be even different than I am now and that the spectrum will continue. Um, I think it's a personal question about what is your goal? What is acceptable to you? What is it that we're after? I know at one point I thought, as long as I'm not binging anymore, that's recovered, like, and that was good enough. And then, it grows and it continues to grow even with body image pieces. Body image is still an ongoing thing for me too. I still think that's a different kind of way of being recovered, but there's more to do, but I'm happy this is good enough. And it's always getting more good enough.
Yeah, it makes me think of that idea. I'm willing to put this work in if I know what the outcome's going to be. That desire to know, for people listening, to know in the here and now what's possible from a body image perspective, what's possible from a food perspective. Some people who are still very invested in weight loss will want to know what's possible from a weight loss perspective. For me, one of the big shifts was actually, why am I doing this recovery work, for want of a better word? If it's just to arrive at a certain place, I couldn't maintain that. I couldn't motivate myself to do that. I had to make the recovery process itself, I want to say, more rewarding. And it wasn't that it was rewarding. I just felt like as the recovery process went on, I felt more and more in alignment with myself. There was something that was so disconnecting. So for me, even before the binging, I would have taken over the binging. I think I would have taken it as, even if I still binge sometimes, if I'm feeling more connected to myself, then it's worth it. And actually having that as the goal, I think really served me because I could have that on any given day, as opposed to waiting until I got to a place where I finally connected with myself. I could have a day when I was connected and a day when I was less connected. That I think was a
How
huge shift for
noble
me.
and evolved of you.
Do you think?
Yes.
No, I just think it's too painful to be disconnected from myself. That was the most painful part.
Sure, but I didn't have that awareness until later. It was like, just stop binging, and then realizing what that binging not binging, how that was connecting me, but I don't think I had so lofty no. I was like, "No, I just need to stop binging," and then it was like, "Oh, and now I feel more I mean, the connection wasn't even I didn't think it was really possible. I didn't even understand it, what being connected to myself even would mean. It wasn't a concept I understood until I understood it.
Yeah. I think I needed that in order to be able to stop binging. And correct me if I'm wrong, it kind of sounds like for you, gave up the dieting thing, you did the work around restriction, the binging stopped, and then began the sort of connection part of it.
Yes.
Where for me, I had to feel more connected to myself before I could stop binging, because I think binging and disconnection was so closely intertwined in how I was using food.
Yeah. Yes, and maybe that is also speaking to the difference between recovery when the starting point is rooted in more restriction first, like that layer for me had had to stop. And then there was that for you, that wasn't such an active part. So I think you were a little bit ahead of me from a physiological level to be able to connect. I think that my physiology had to be addressed first.
Yeah.
I also want to remind people that because I talk about this with clients enough that it's obviously something that is a concern, right? A lot of clients will need reassurance that, am I doing this right? Because I still feel X, Y, and Z. And it's like remembering how long your brain and body were in the throes of a disordered relationship with food and body, and how much time you've actually been attending to it and participating in the recovery process fully. It takes time. And I think first there is more of a, okay, we focus on behaviors. Well, not only just, but sometimes behaviors can happen before the internal shifts, or at least we mechanically have these internal shifts, like it's more in the brain. It's more a cognitive process of, okay, I'll talk to myself this way. Okay, I will tell myself that I don't need to feel guilty, but that's not connected yet. It's not an embodied, and that's normal for it to feel kind of mechanical first before it feels true. And for me, that evolution took a long time. And if I had felt like I wasn't doing it fast enough, that would have been really discouraging. I think I had a lot of patience with I had a lot of patience through this process for whatever reason. That helped me because I think there was an inherent understanding of it's going to take time for all of that to unwind. And as long as I'm putting one foot in front of the other and sort of showing up for myself as in the best way that I can at that moment, then I trusted in getting there. And that is what happened. And I think it's still happening. I think there's still ways in which I am working on my own evolution in many areas that I'm not there, but I get it. It's like, okay, I don't need to be there yet. It's what is there, but okay, a little bit what is there. But I trust this process, and I know that I'm doing the best I can. And some days that looks like this, and some days that looks like this, but I'm moving along. And to me, that just feels good enough. As long as I'm paying attention and continuing to work on something, and that's in my zone of awareness, then that feels like good enough.
You may not be able to answer this, but what I'm thinking, maybe some listeners are thinking that this as well, is how did you do that? Because I'm guessing that there were times that you wanted this to be fixed yesterday, right? So at
Yeah.
some point you accepted that idea that this was going to take time and that there were certain smaller acts that needed to become enough. Do you know how you got to that point? Because I think that might be the point that many people
Mm.
struggle to embody.
I wish I had a better answer. No, it wasn't it comes from what we've talked about before, this level of exhaustion. I really think it sprung from that because there was no longer chasing and desperation and urgency. It was this sort of surrendered, okay, like it was an innate understanding that that wasn't going to produce anything for good for me, and that itself, then there was less resistance. So I was just like, okay, I got it. Some part of me got it. And another part of it was, I guess, kind of it was there was a bit of a black and white mentality that I used to my advantage because at that time there was still a lot of black and white thinking, and it was this idea of I'm going to do this. I'm going to go into this 100%. And I'm not going to entertain the thoughts of the other stuff. And then I can come out of it if I choose, and I'm going to do that for a year. So there was something about I'm going in, and I'm not looking out until later. And that helped me because I did operate that way, and it was harder for me to see a nuance. So it was just kind of like, I'm throwing everything I got at this, and I'm going to be patient with that because that's the choice I'm making. And that was helpful, and knowing that there might be an out later where I could then consider all those thoughts that sometimes creep in and make me doubt and question and worry, that all was shelved. And that was a decision. That was very clear. It like started on a day. So for me, that was like very much almost the way you might think about a diet. You know what I mean? I think it was kind of where I was at that point. So I was like, I'm doing this thing where I do this thing and I trust it. Um, and it was the only one that ever stuck. It was actually the process. But I do think part of it was a bit black and white.
Do you think there's anything that could have happened in that year from a food and body perspective that would have made you abandon it? And by it, I mean what you were doing, the non-diet stuff, the permission, all of that.
No, I mean, maybe, but nothing I can think of because weight gain would have been the most obvious deterrent, and that happened. And again, I was waiting for that. I was prepared for that. At this point in my life, it was the most important thing to me. It was something that I was really ready to be done with, and I was very much in that place of like, I am willing to do this now, and there's nothing. And 4 years prior, even less, maybe it was only 2 years prior. Yeah, I think it was 2 years prior. It was in 2016. I remember having journal entries of like trying something similar and not it didn't work so much. So I think there was a readiness factor there, and it was front and center. And it was, this is what I am doing. I'm going to gain weight. And that was probably the scariest thing.
For me, in that semi-recovered state, I can remember the binges would come, I don't know, a couple of times a month, which was semi-recovered for me at that point because they'd been so frequent before then. And I remember thinking, maybe this is going to be my life forever. Maybe I am somebody who is always going to have these binges from time to time. And I guess that my job is to just figure out how to rebalance, get myself back into some kind of equilibrium as quickly as I can. So I feel like my work, if we look at the binge eating cycle, right? That whole idea of like you binge, you feel guilt and shame. So then you try to control. So you get the urge to binge, you binge, guilt and shame, round and round like that. And I think everybody wants to break the cycle before the binge, like at that binge urge
Yes.
point. That's where I want to break the cycle. And actually, I think it was the guilt and shame afterwards. So in that semi-recovered place, whilst I didn't feel, I wasn't exactly joyous after a binge, but I didn't feel that same level of shame or guilt. I've moved much more into acceptance. And I think Eckhart Tolle's work and Byron Katie, who I've mentioned before as well, a lot of what they teach is around suffering being caused in the mind. Not pain. Pain happens. We have painful
Mhm.
things, emotional pain as well, but that real suffering happens in the resistance to what is. That really spoke to me. And I came back to that again and again. So I didn't have the one day for you, like you can pinpoint, maybe you even, do you know the date as well?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
my birthday.
Oh, yes, of course, your 40th birthday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have that date. It was just this coming back to this idea again and again. And I still do that now. It's still a coming back to this idea of acceptance. But I come back to a lot because it's the only way I've found to release myself from the suffering. You talked about suffering and not having to suffer. I thought maybe I'm always going to struggle with food, but maybe I don't have to suffer as much as I am. And then within that, and within almost the acceptance of that, it was gradual. It was one of those things, and back to my favorite C.S. Lewis quote, which I don't know if I've said it on the podcast, possibly, possibly not, which is how isn't it funny how every day nothing changes, and when you look back, everything's different?
Yeah.
That was very much
Mm.
my experience. Every time I tried to make a big change on any given day, I inevitably fell flat on my face and have to be
Ah,
humbled and accept and rebalance.
what a beautiful, I love that because we did that so differently and
Mhm.
they were both effective. And what you're describing, I've changed in other ways that way. I just think that's hopeful.
And I think the acceptance for me started with accepting external things. So things that had already happened, I found
Mm.
easier to accept because I could really see how there was nothing I could do about them now. If you want connection and support around any of the topics we talk about on the podcast, we would love for you to join our membership community.
Members have access to monthly online support groups, a private Facebook group, live episode recordings, and member-only Q&As.
If you would like to join us, please head to lifeafterdietspodcast.com/community.
Now let's get back to the episode.
I was thinking after I mentioned earlier about connection being so important to me, being connected to myself. I imagine that maybe some people listening might think, well, actually, I don't want to be connected to myself. I don't like this. I don't like who I am. I don't like these things about me. So why would I want to
Mm,
stay connected to that? And I think, again, like back to this idea of resistance, I was certainly, and maybe some people can relate that feeling really resistant to who I am today, like how I am. I can cope with it if I know a better version of me is around the corner. But
yeah.
that idea of accepting who I am today and self-acceptance, do you know what, Steph? This has really been on my mind lately because all I want is for people to really accept and learn self-appreciation, and I don't know how to teach it. I don't know if it's possible to teach it.
I don't I think it's a pattern of thinking and redirecting thoughts, um, until they become embodied. To me, I'm sure that's not the only I know that's not the only way. That was how I felt like, because self-acceptance was the opposite of anything I ever thought possible for myself and or wanted. Um, but that was one of those C.S. Lewis, like, where the process of shifting. We've talked about that, the widening of the landscape, like, this is the way I think, this is the way I think, but, like, what you speak about that inserting doubt. That process over time, I think lends itself to self-acceptance, and that to me is a longer term, slower, subtle, not step by step, just the practice of widening that lens and imagining that you what if this? What if that? What if this isn't true? And
So
just holding space for that.
when I work with clients, one of the things I'll often ask them is all those things that you believe about yourself, all those negative assumptions that you make, all the ways that you feel like you're not good enough. What if, and I say just what if, we're just playing what if they weren't true? What if it's all been based on this false premise that these things are true that's then impacted your life? And what I tend to see is that people fall into, I was going to say despair, and despair sounds a bit hopeless. So I'm going to reinsert the word grief because grief feels a little bit more like a process. I nearly
Mm.
said process then. I wanted to say it like you. Reason-
Process.
process. Yeah, that it's really painful because then it's this idea that my life has been a waste. There's all these other negative thoughts and assumptions that come with what if we've been mistaken when we believe these things about not being good enough, not being enough, being too much.
That reminds me of I have a client who's in her 50s who just this week said to me, "I don't think I'm angry anymore about the time I've wasted or that I didn't get here sooner. I'm just happy to be here now, and I'm excited about the rest of my life." I mean, it sounds like words, but I you could see it, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that is a process too of I think you move through that anger a little bit. It's part of the grief process. And then I think there is a point of getting to when you stay with this long enough that you're kind of like, well, here I am though. And that's that's good. You know, I'm happy to be here.
Mm.
That's the end of that story.
Yeah, that's a nice story.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say something. Oh, another question to ask yourself is what if it's okay when you said, what if it's not true? Another one that has helped me is what if it's okay that it is true? Or what if it's okay that it's partly true? That one has really helped me a lot. Just takes the charge out of it. Because there are things about me that I still may not like, but it's like, well, it's not that it's not true necessarily. It's just that it's maybe partly true or it's only part of the story. And what if that's okay? That
Yeah.
to me is like, huh, okay. Thanks.
You mean I don't have to be perfect? What? Why didn't anybody tell me?
Yeah, I like that one.
Mhm. What would you say to somebody who feels like they've been stuck in this quasi, semi recovery state? Let's say for a few years, and they
Mm.
feel like they're not They don't fit the criteria for an eating disorder, yet food and body image is still pretty painful, and it's just feeling a little bit like Groundhog Day.
Yeah. I think there's more to be done, right? Like, to me, there was, like, some amount of progress that got made, but something else is still unaddressed or stagnant. I can relate to that in certain ways before where I might have had I mean, it never lasted, but there were times where I was okay-ish, but there was still so much unexplored about my self-perception or my like, what I really wanted to be doing, the ways that I still felt stifled, the ways that I still didn't have boundaries, the ways that I still was a critic to myself and I hadn't really done I think behaviorally we may change some things, but where that suffering is still going on internally, which is kind of how it feels like that's what a lot of quasi whatever recovery looks like, that there's to me it's kind of uh,
Were you gonna say fun?
yes.
I thought you were. I was just gonna say the F word about recovery.
And then I stopped myself because I was like, that'll be so off-putting to so many people, but from a intellectual point of view, that excites me. That's kind of like, oh, like what's more there's more to investigate. There's more to and I think that I can only say that because I am looking at it from a I tend to look at things from an intellectual point of view more than emotional. So to me, it's like I'm curious. Like that makes me curious about what else is there? What else can I do? How else can I set myself free? That's fun to me. Um, Not that it's easy, but I think that there's hope in that too. Like of, all right, well then there's other stuff. What might that be? I think that's where a lot of these questioning, like listening to podcasts like this and following different accounts that are posing questions. And I think it's following those questions that really make you stop. It's just like, what do you see and read that you're like, oh, that hit somewhere, not sure why. Paying attention to those things is probably like an angle in. Um, and support, I think, is important in those scenarios. I mean, it's possible, I'm sure, to do some of that alone, but I think where maybe why we're stuck in those kind of groundhog days is because it's a bit daunting to go into something that might still be lingering, and it's like, "Oh, I don't wanna do that, so I'm gonna stay here." Um, so maybe having some more support around those areas might be like, "Okay, I'm going in. Help me with this." I need to process this with someone.
So I'm imagining then if somebody is stuck in semi-recovery, that there might be an element of resistance going on. For me, whenever I feel stuck in something, when I really accept the situation and stop ruminating about how it shouldn't be this way, it is this way, maybe it does need to be this way at the moment, then something feels released. Then I feel like I have options.
Mm,
And it doesn't mean that I want to stay there. When we're in resistance, we're in a fight with either ourselves or reality.
yeah.
And so we can't move anywhere because we're just back and forth or we're pushing against something that we just can't control anyway. It was when I accepted my semi-recovery that I got into what I would classify as recovery. And I know we've talked about not liking the word recovery very much. I've been using the word healing a lot more.
Well, see, I
So
used to use healing more, and then I moved over to recovery again.
tell me why.
Sure.
What was with healing for you?
Because neither word sounds exactly accurate, so I keep trying out new ones. I keep, like,
Mhm,
bouncing.
mhm,
Healing got to feel a little bit, like, cliché to me.
yeah.
I was saying it all the time also, so I was like, "Let me just change things up." I think I still say healing. I do still say it. Another area of concern, I think, with recovery, healing, is the residual emotional eating that can exist after more significant disordered patterns kind of calm down. And I think a lot of people will say, I'm not fully recovered because I still emotionally eat. I still use food in ways that, it's not just about hunger and fullness. And how normal that is. And also how long that there is a difference between eating emotionally and suffering for it, which speaks to what you're just saying about resistance of what is, and not resisting that. And I think I think that there's a huge difference in how recovery might feel if you're resisting that piece and if you're not. and also how much we might process through that. I still eat emotionally, but I don't have resistance about it, which is I think it would be entirely different if I did. Instead, it feels like, yeah, I get it. I understand why I do that, and I can move past that, and it doesn't last any longer than it lasts. And then, so to me, like, it's this suffering piece that is, in my mind, a huge part of what's inside of recovery to me is not is the less suffering. Um, I still think that there's probably, and as the years have gone on, this has shown itself to be true, more fine tuning of that. And I think there's more to do still. Um, I think that that's part of my season of life with having kids and having a lot of stress and having a nervous system activation that's quite persistent. And I use food sometimes to deal with that, but it's okay with me. And it doesn't extend beyond the need for it. You know what I mean? It doesn't turn into the meta eating, which would then create more suffering. It's just like, I understand its place and I don't feel overrun by it. And so I don't suffer for it. And I don't know. It makes sense to me, and a lot of things that make sense to me help me feel okay with it, and then there's less resistance.
On the emotional eating front then, do you ever emotionally eat and find afterwards you're in physical discomfort?
No.
That's, I think, a big difference. So this was I really relate to that part of coming out of the binge eating, but having this very emotional relationship with food. And one thing I'd started to identify and notice and had to learn to tell the difference between is when I was using food to soothe and I felt soothed, and when I was using food to switch off.
Yeah.
The switching off came at a price. It came at a price of physical discomfort, a sense of feeling out of control, feeling a bit more compulsive, even if it wasn't a full blown binge.
Mm.
That I think is a different part for many people because if you eat and you use food to soothe and you feel soothed afterwards, it's worked.
Yeah.
There's the other emotional eating where you're eating food to try to feel better or to try and feel something that food can't make you feel better with.
But I will also notice myself munching on trail mix, and I keep trail mix in my freezer, and I love it. And, like, when I need to switch off sometimes when it's chaos in my kitchen, this is the place, I will notice myself doing that. Uh, it doesn't reach a point of physical discomfort because I catch it sooner. Maybe that is a soothing, but it doesn't reach that physical discomfort because 'cause I'm not checked out entirely from that experience. I'm sort of watching it and giving myself permission to check out with it. Um, and then there's this line. I did a lot of work on, like, where's this line? Where's that line where you're crossing that threshold into something else that's not helping you? And I think I know where that is, and that would be more of a binge response to me,
Mhm.
you know? And that part I think I don't bleed into, but it's still emotional eating can be checked out eating. But I suppose not 100% checked out.
That's what I was thinking, because to me, checked out eating would normally end with feeling physically
Mm.
uncomfortable, feeling a bit sick, just not feeling physically well, um,
I don't
as a
think I've
result of
ever
it.
been entirely checked out of any eating experience, even in binges. I think I've always had a great awareness of what I was doing and just couldn't stop, but not that I was checked out.
Oh,
You
that's
know, like,
interesting.
I never had those times where I was like, "What did I just do?" Um, mm-mm. It
Mhm.
was always very much within my awareness, just completely out of my control.
Yeah. I could finish a binge and look down and realize that I've just got it all over me. I
Yeah.
would have no idea when I was eating, and I would just
Oh,
be left with that mess afterwards and being confronted with the wrappers, and that realization, I definitely had the full-blown checked out
yeah?
eating. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I have. I think I've always known. I've
Mhm.
watched myself do it with loathing every bite. Um, Interesting.
Mm. Yes. Well, we
Hmm.
find it interesting. Let's hope the listeners do as well.
Well, then
Probably.
in that respect, somebody who checks out like that, part of, like, recovery would probably, I would assume, involve some level of awareness, even if the behavior is still there. You know, that shift towards awareness would be part of recovering, part of progress.
Yeah, and I could even use the word connection and presence, being present interchangeably. and it would still
Yeah.
work. And it was difficult and it was painful, and there were times when there was a real pushback against staying connected and staying present. And I did a lot of practicing and really gently going at being able to tolerate, and even more than tolerate, to almost try to welcome that feeling of pushing back. Because I would say to myself, I had this really strong urge to buy a load of food and check out. And I'd say, like, okay, have one thing and stay present. And if you want another thing, then you can. But the one, if you like, I could even say rule that I kept coming back to was this: you need to stay present. And there'd be times where I would just want to thump the table and stamp my feet because I didn't want to be present. I wanted
Yeah.
to check out. That's what I wanted to do with food. And it felt like that experience was at risk of not being allowed, which it was.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there was a part of me as well that was really coming from a place of, no, I want to be more connected to myself.
I guess, when I think about this concept and just like a way of wrapping it up, I think that the continued process of putting one foot in front of the other and staying kind of self-committed in this way is the way forward with it. Um, and that if that's how you're showing up, then there's something good in that. There's something recovering in that, in just that process alone, and that you're not necessarily doing something wrong. As long as I think that consciousness and that connection to self, even if you're still having thoughts and there's some kind of suffering that is still involved, the pursuit of staying connected to oneself is this job, I think, and will lead somewhere. Um, I think it's just a variable of time and maybe some tweaking and some support, but that is, to me, you're doing good, like that's a good thing.
Yes. And in response to the question as it came in, it sounded like the question was, do you hit a wall where this is as far as you're going to get and you have to accept this
Mm.
semi-recovered place? And I believe we grow and we develop and we learn. So I don't think that there is a wall that we hit and that's it.
Mhm.
We stay there
I
pressed up
agree.
against that wall.
And I think if you're asking the question, there's something beyond the wall for you.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
All righty.
Alrighty. Wow. Good chats.
Good times, good times.
Okay. See you next week.
All right, see everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.